In this video, you're going to learn how to turn practice skills into game time execution. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, mental performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. One of the main reasons that I'll have an athlete come work with me is because they're struggling to perform well in games, but in practices, they're performing well. So there's definitely a disconnect there. What we have to do first is identify, why is this disconnect there? What's causing you to perform well in practice, but then keeping you from performing well in games? And the first place that we can look is performance anxiety. Sports performance anxiety involves getting overly anxious and nervous before a game. This isn't just your typical nerves that you experience before a game. When you have performance anxiety, it is so much more intense. And a lot of times with performance anxiety, you're going to experience this days leading up to the game. When I was in high school, I can remember laying in bed the night before a game and feeling so much anxiety to the point where I was almost dreading the next day. That's what it kind of feels like when you're experiencing this level of anxiety. Now, why would this level of anxiety keep you from performing well in games, but then maybe you're performing well in practice? Well, you have to think no farther than, where are outcomes really coming from? And they're coming from games, right? In practice, it's probably more okay to make mistakes. In practice, you do want to perform well, but not to the same level of during games. During games, that's when everything counts. So there's so much focus placed on the outcome. And performance anxiety is driven by the outcome. When you're worried, what are you worried about? You're worried about making a mistake. You're worried about wanting to win. You're worried about what other people are going to think of you. You're worried about not embarrassing yourself. You're always focusing on the future. So when you can't perform well in games, but you're doing well in practice, a lot of times this happens because you're experiencing a lot of anxiety because you're focusing too much on what may or may not happen. Now, very similar to that is the second reason you're probably not performing well in games, but you might be performing well in practice, and that is the fear of failure. The fear of failure causes you to play timidly because you're putting so much attention on not wanting to fail, not wanting to make a mistake. In your mind, if you're dealing with fear of failure, a lot of times you're not even thinking, I want to succeed. You're simply thinking, I don't want to make a mistake. And there's such a difference in those subtle changes in mindset. Because one, you're focused on failure. The other, you're focused on the possibility of succeeding. And when you're focusing so much on failure, of course you're going to hold yourself back. In practices, you might be performing freely. You might be performing with so much confidence. But it's probably because you're not as afraid of making mistakes. You know that practices, it's okay to make mistakes. But come game time, come your performance, you can't make mistakes. So you tighten up. You don't want to fail, and so you play timidly. It's a little bit like you're tiptoeing. And the third reason is poor focus. I don't say a lack of focus, because you're always focused on something. What happens during games a lot of times is that focus, it becomes placed on something that you don't really want it to be placed on. For example, maybe you're focusing too much on your opponent. So maybe you're thinking how intimidating they look. Maybe you're focused on how irritating they are. Maybe you're focused on how big they are, right? Or how good they seem. All that kind of focus is only going to take your attention off of yourself. Another thing you might be focused on is a mistake you just made. If you just made a mistake and you can't let that go, you're still focused on it, then it's going to be very difficult for you to play well moving forward because your mind is still stuck in the past. And so if you're dealing with this poor focus, that poor focus probably isn't there during practice as much, because in practice you don't have as many of these external distractions, because once again, you're not so focused on the outcome. You're not so focused on an opponent, right? Because you're just training, you're just practicing. And so those are the three reasons that I really see why athletes struggle with taking practice skills and translating them into the game. Performance anxiety, fear of failure, and poor focus. Now, knowing why you aren't playing well in games, but you might be playing well in practice, that's all and good, but it's not going to do anything for you unless you start working on overcoming these challenges. Now, the first place that is really helpful to look are your thoughts. We have to identify, what are you thinking during games? Most of the time, during games, you're going to be thinking something a little bit differently than during practice. Obviously, because it's a complete different situation, right? But we have to make sure that what you're thinking is helping you perform, rather than having what you're thinking hold you back. Let's use poor focus as an example. If you're focusing too much on the opponent, what kind of thoughts do you think you're having? You're probably thinking, man, they look really good. I never play well against that team. Those kind of thoughts aren't going to help you. They're only going to distract you. What you can do when you're trying to take more control of your thoughts is you can come up with lists. specific lists that you want to repeat to yourself. Now, these lists aren't going to be perfectly repeated during games, but what you do is you identify some specific phrases you want to say to yourself, and then you repeat them on a daily basis. And so then you've kind of memorized them, where now during games, it's going to be a lot easier for you when you're experiencing performance anxiety, let's say, to tell yourself to take a deep breath, let it go. Hey, let's focus right now on this present moment. I am confident. I know that I got the skills capable to succeed. So you're more comfortable with talking to yourself. And that right there is such a huge key. You want to be talking to yourself in a way that is positive, that's productive, that's helping you perform rather than holding you back. You want to be coaching yourself just like you would coach somebody else. So what I recommend is making yourself a list of phrases that you want to say to yourself that help boost your confidence and help improve your focus. Now in the description below, what I've done is put 3 different lists there that can help you in making your own. One is going to be some self-talk for performance anxiety, one is self-talk for fear of failure, and one is self-talk for poor focus. But the main principle that I really want to address is that during a game, it's very important for you to turn to your thoughts. You have to identify, what am I saying right now? Is what I'm saying right now helpful? And what should I be saying to myself right now to help myself perform better? A second tool that you can use to help turn these practice skills into game time execution is mental rehearsal. Now we're going to talk a little bit about mental rehearsal, but what I've done, if you want a little bit more detail about it, is I put a card on this video that can take you to another video I've made that goes into a lot more detail on the different visualization techniques that you can use as an athlete. But the core principle is mental rehearsal can really help you with confidence. Mental rehearsal can really help you with performance anxiety. Mental rehearsal can really help you when you're wanting to perform well under pressure. And we see all of these things as things that keep you from performing well in games. If you're experiencing a lot of anxiety, if you are experiencing a lot of fear, if you're experiencing low confidence, if you are experiencing a lot of pressure that you don't know how to manage, those are all going to play into you not being able to perform as well during games. What you can do is use a mental rehearsal practice to help build your confidence, to help perform better under pressure. And if you do this consistently, then that's going to translate into games. And then the last tool that you want to use is you want to set clear objectives for yourself. When I say set clear objectives, what I mean is set objectives that are 100% within your control that you can focus on. This really attacks that idea of poor focus. We want to control your focus during a game. When you're setting your objectives, you want to think, what's kind of a cue that I can tell myself that if I focus on will allow me to play my best during a game? An example I always give is a basketball player I was working with who told himself, stay low, stay low. Whether he was on offense or defense, he wanted to stay low. That was a physical cue that if he told himself to stay low, he knew, I'm going to play my best, right? That puts me in the best position to play my best. And when you're setting your objectives, that is the key phrase. What's going to put you in the best position to play your best? Another example I have is from an athlete I work with who tells herself to be aggressive. That idea of being aggressive, it gets her into that right mindset, into the right focus that she needs to play her best. I always recommend setting an objective on the physical and on the mental side, but you can choose just one if you want. The key is set yourself a very clear objective, one that is within your control that you can focus on, and that's going to really help allow those talents that you've worked for to shine through during games. So those are the 3 ways that you can really work on taking your practice skills and translating them into games. What you want to do is focus on your thoughts, right? Focus on what you're thinking, use some mental rehearsal, and then set clear objectives for games. Thank you for watching, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you're interested in learning more about one-on-one mental performance coaching, head over to successstartswithin.com.